Tiger, find no trouble. But when they find you and you let them know I'm cool, this time you don't row. Be a tiger who's cool until trouble find you. Bleh.
Ahoya, 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 ahoya. We want the peace to heal the wounds. Yes, we want peace to heal the wounds. Ahoya, ahoya, ahoya. I do this race for the freedom of this nation. I do this race for the progress of the people. Have mercy. I do this race for the justice of the people. I'm a winner. We are the winners. Ahoya, 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 ahoya. Decision race, reversal is formations. The people choice. I'm a winner. We are the winners. We are the winners. How many times they snatch your rights? You stand there looking. How many times they snatch my rights? I stand there looking. We want the peace to heal the wounds. Yeah, yes, we want peace to heal the wounds. Ahoya, 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 ahoya. Forgiveness is so easy right now. Forgiveness. I pledge to be faithful and be loyal in my duties. Obey the rules and regulations. I said I'm a winner. We are the winners. Ahoya, 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 ahoya. How many times they snatch your rights? You stand there looking. How many times they snatch my rights? I stand there looking. We want the peace to heal the wounds. Yeah, yes, we want peace to heal the wounds. Ahoya, 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 ahoya.
On France for security, like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, countries that were already in direct conflict with France over military and economic issues. Togo was not openly hostile to Western influence. It is about an entire region reconsidering its political and economic relationships with the West. Perhaps the most significant outcome of Togo's shift is the larger message it sends about African sovereignty. For decades, African nations have been told that their economic survival depends on Western financial systems, that their security must be handled by foreign military operations, and that their political stability requires international oversight. The AES, and now Togo's move toward it, is proving otherwise. These nations are not simply rejecting Western influence. They are building their alternatives. They are creating new financial models, establishing independent security networks, and fostering intra-African trade that does not shift could be China and Russia, both of whom have been expanding their engagement in Africa. China's economic partnerships and infrastructure projects could become increasingly attractive to AES nations looking for alternatives to Western investment. Meanwhile, Russia's security alliances could expand further. None of these countries have recorded as much development as they should have if the CFA franc was truly for their benefit. The highest income per capita any of these nations had experienced was in the 1970s. Samba further explained that the fact that the CFA franc is pegged to the euro is even detrimental to the economies of francophone countries because their exports are priced and traded in US dollars. Thereby, they make their products, which are primarily commodity products, uncompetitive in the international market. This system undermines the economic freedom of Francophone Africa because it traps them in a neo-colonial model that favors foreign companies over local companies.
Most prominent leaders in the anti-apartheid struggle, and in some quarters, he was seen as the most important black South African leader of his generation. He was so important, in fact, that the apartheid government was terrified of him. Bantu Steve Biko inspired a generation of black South Africans to claim their true identity and refuse to be part of their own oppression. Unfortunately, Steve Biko paid the ultimate price with his life. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the life and legacy of Steve Biko, one of the stalwarts of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa.
Frank. However, a combination of internal divisions and France's fierce determination not to allow any of its former colonies to have complete independence led to the Malian franc being abandoned and Mali being integrated into the CFA zone in 1984. Since then, no other Francophone country has attempted to break away from these economic shackles. However, in 2019, Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara, together with his French counterpart President Macron, released a press statement saying that the CFA as it had existed until then was no more. According to it, had deviated from the original ideals of the founding father and had turned into a puppet organization for the West and a threat to their own members. According to Ibrahim Traoré, the next logical step after withdrawing from the bloc to ensure complete sovereignty for these nations is to create their own currency, free from the hold of France's influence. Niger's military junta, General Tiani, also confirmed this when he came out days later to say that currency is a sign of sovereignty.
Russia has stepped in to protect Burkina Faso and Captain Traoré. The reports that I was hearing was that they've sent troops.
And when you're not denouncing yourself, you must praise them. Even though we know very well that their skin is a mutation of the original, which is you. The original DNA. Anybody else that does not look black is a mutation of the original thing.
That we remain in a perpetual state of begging. That is what we are doing to warn ourselves. And we are not for 1 minute saying that we will shut ourselves out from the rest of the world. What we are saying is that we must define how we engage with the whole world. And we are saying that as individual countries, we are weak, and the rest of the world wants to operate and to deal with us in our weak state. The United States of America are dealing with Rwanda on second-hand clothing. Rwanda cannot resist them. Burundi cannot. Kenya cannot. Uganda cannot. But if we are East Africa with a population of 300 million, we can. If we are SADC, we can.
To bring an end to conflicts, to have a truce that is measurable, verifiable, and that enables negotiation of a lasting peace, where we will discuss not only Ukraine's reconstruction, its territories, but also the security guarantees, meaning maintaining peace over the long term. As I said to the president, we've experienced peace accords that were only ceasefires without ensuring security guarantees, Minsk 1 and 2. And we want to make sure this doesn't happen again. And I know that the president has expressed the desire to be a player for peace in the region. I've spoken with some 30.
This is Guerrillero Heroico, one of the most iconic photographs of the 20th century. Taken by Alberto Corda in 1960, it quickly spread across social movements across the globe. Looking at the image, it's not hard to see why it captured the hearts of so many people. Here's an attractive, rugged, determined revolutionary, ripped from context and space so that it appeals to anyone with a vision for a better world. And the story of the real Che Guevara really lives up.
Sé que vienes a matarme. Dispara, cobarde, que solamente vas a matar a un hombre.
This is the short romantic history of Che Guevara that's known in popular culture. But his sworn comrade and confidant, Fidel Castro, hardly gets the same affection. Both men fought valiantly, overthrew an oppressive regime, and changed the fate of the world forever. But outside of Chicano communities, the popular appeal of Fidel is lineage of legacy is a part of a wider problem. We love revolutionaries, but only when they're martyrs. Jones Manuel is a historian and a member of the Partido Comunista Brasileiro, and he believes that this dichotomy has a lot to do with
leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. The alliance is not exclusive. It is a call to all Africans who hope for sovereignty, independence, and total freedom. Captain Ibrahim Traoré said, "This invitation symbolizes more than just membership. It represents a movement, an awakening that challenges the status quo and aims to redefine Africa's place in the world." Formed in 2024 as a response to the region's unique challenges, the Alliance of Sahel States has achieved what many deemed impossible. It has forged a path toward unity and development, proving that African nations can take control of their destinies. In a region plagued by terrorism and instability, the Alliance's coordinated military efforts have been a game changer. Joint Rapid Intervention Brigades have successfully reclaimed.
Back in 2018, during his presidency, Donald Trump made headlines with a controversial statement about immigration. When asked about immigrants from Africa, he reportedly responded, "Why would the US want immigrants from all these shithole countries?" It wasn't subtle, and it left no doubt about how he viewed the continent at the time. Trump, the same man who dismissed Africa in such stark terms, suddenly seems very interested in the continent. It's a surprising turn of events, leaving many wondering what's behind this newfound attention. According to renowned African thinker Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, the answer is clear. Africa is no longer seen as a charity case. It's now a global prize. For decades, the United States enjoyed unrivaled dominance on the world stage, wielding the strongest economy and military to spread its influence. During this time, Africa was largely sidelined, dismissed as insignificant or simply a recipient of aid. But things are changing. The unchallenged global dominance of the US is beginning to slip as new power players, like China and Russia, step onto the scene. These nations aren't just rising in influence, they're actively working to disrupt US supremacy, and they've set their sights on Africa as a key battleground in this geopolitical struggle. Why Africa? The continent is rich in natural resources, from minerals critical to modern technology to vast agricultural potential. It's also home to a young and rapidly growing population, offering opportunities for markets, innovation, and partnerships. Recognizing this, countries like China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran are making moves to deepen their footholds in Africa. Infrastructure projects, military alliances, trade agreements. Everyone seems to want a slice of the action. And the US? It's watching closely, realizing it can't afford to be left behind. Lumumba predicts that if Trump secures another term in office, we'll see America shift its strategy to focus on Africa like never before. The big question, though, is how Trump plans to approach this new competition. What will his playbook look like in this high-stakes scramble? During his previous term, his administration consistently pushed to slash international assistance programs, driven by the America First mantra. That approach left little room for handouts, and many believe his return to power would see an even tougher stance on cutting aid globally. But here's where things get interesting. According to Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, Trump might need to rethink that strategy, especially when it comes to Africa. The dynamics on the continent have shifted dramatically, and it's no longer the UNGIRI has stepped in as a key security ally, forging military partnerships across the continent, particularly in the Sahel. And they're not alone. Turkey, Iran, and even South Korea are strengthening their ties with African nations, offering alternatives that didn't exist before. At the same time, the influence of traditional powers like France and the US is fading. Anti-French sentiment has swept across West Africa, leading to the expulsion of French military forces from several countries. Even the US hasn't been immune to this shift, with its military presence reduced in places like Nigeria and Chad. These developments haven't gone unnoticed in Washington, and Trump knows that if the US doesn't act fast, it risks losing its foothold entirely. But according to Lumumba, Trump's renewed interest in Africa isn't driven by a sudden wave of goodwill. It's a move born out of necessity. He's not coming to build partnerships or strengthen friendships. His approach will likely be a sharp pivot, aimed squarely at securing American interests. Analysts predict he'll focus on cementing US control over key military bases, tapping into Africa's vast mineral resources, and securing vital trade routes, all before rivals like China and Russia solidify their influence. While the US has watched China build infrastructure and Russia position itself as a go-to security partner, it's largely stayed on the sidelines. Lumumba suggests that Trump's presidency could mark a turning point. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Trump's motives may not be entirely about countering China. Some analysts speculate he could also be positioning himself to cozy up to an old acquaintance, Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite the official US stance that views Russia as a threat, Trump has consistently acted as if he doesn't share that perspective. In fact, many believe his relationship with Putin runs far deeper than he lets on. According to Professor Lumumba, Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin could create a strange and unsettling partnership in Africa. But here's the real question. Is Africa prepared for yet another round of global power plays on its soil? It's been over 140 years since the Berlin Conference, where European powers carved up the African continent. These modern Africa Plus One summits have become the new Berlin Conference, with world powers vying for influence. Take China's recent forum on China-Africa cooperation in Beijing, for example. President Xi Jinping announced plans to pump nearly $51 billion into Africa over 3 years, pledged to prioritize Africa in a personnel. South Korea wasn't far behind. At the Korea-Africa Summit, President Yoon Suk-yeol promised $14 billion in export loans and pledged to boost cooperation in critical minerals and technology. Even Italy got in on the action, holding its own summit earlier this year, with its Prime Minister unveiling a $5.5 billion plan for African development. And at every one of these events, African heads of state showed up in full force. On the surface, it looks like these nations are extending a helping hand, but when you dig deeper, it's clear who benefits the most. Studies have shown that these summits are inherently lopsided. Paul Nantulia, a researcher at the African Center for Strategic Studies, argues that the host nations hold all the cards. They drive the negotiations, leaving African leaders with little leverage. In the end, Africa's resources are sold off. Why do you think these countries are so eager to host Africa-centric summits? Why is Africa such a critical part of their foreign policy? The answer lies in the future economy. And the technologies driving this revolution rely heavily on critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, most of which are found in Africa. Africa isn't just a player in this game, it's the prize. The countries with access to these. That's why every major power, from China and Russia to the West, is scrambling to form alliances and deepen ties with African nations. It's eerily reminiscent of the Berlin Conference, but with a twist. Instead of outright colonization, today's powers are wrapping their ambitions in the language of partnership and mutual benefit. Decolonization may have put an end to formal divisions, but leaders are being asked to partner in ways that often serve foreign interests far more than their own. It's frustrating to watch how these so-called Africa summits unfold. Every time, it's the same routine. A foreign country announces a grand meeting with Africa Summit hosted in Washington, D.C. The Korea-Africa Summit, held in Seoul. The Italy-Africa Summit, of course it took place in Rome. Each time, if they're the ones begging for favors. Think about it. Why can't the African Union send a few well-prepared representatives to negotiate on behalf of the continent? Why do all these leaders need to show up in person, giving the impression of submission instead of partnership? And more importantly, what do these summits actually achieve? Let's look at the promises. Host nations often announce eye-popping numbers to dazzle the audience. $10 billion in development aid here, $5 billion in infrastructure investment there. South Korea promised billions in loans and aid at its summit. Italy pledged billions for African development. On paper, it sounds great until you dig deeper. Reports show that many of these promises remain unfulfilled. The money rarely arrives, but the resources, they're strategic moves by powerful nations to secure their interests. China, for instance, wants easy access to Africa's vast mineral wealth, and it's growing. The US is eyeing the same resources, but with an added goal, blocking China and Russia from gaining too much influence on the continent. Europe, meanwhile, wants to tap into Africa's resources while also curbing migration. That's why many European policies tie aid and investment to controlling migration flows. In the end, every country hosting these summits is focused on what they can get. They may offer loans, infrastructure projects, or some financial aid, but their development. They're interested in what Africa can do for them. African leaders often seem unaware of the leverage they hold and continue to side also in people. With a growing population full of young, innovative minds, the continent has everything it needs to chart its own future. But to unlock that future, African leaders must recognize the power they hold. They're not in a position to beg, they're in a position to negotiate. The world needs Africa, and that gives the continent the upper hand, if only its leaders would seize it. One way to start is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Unlike past military takeovers, these transitions have been largely peaceful and have brought leaders who are determined to prioritize Africa's interests. Dr. Akana Chi-Hombori Kwal, a geopolitical expert from Zimbabwe, called these coups a revolution, a wake-up call for Africa's leadership. Even Western observers have taken notice. During a US congressional meeting, a military general described the leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso as sophisticated, acknowledging their intelligence and strategic thinking. And their actions speak volumes. Within a short time, these leaders have made bold moves that many thought impossible. Gave France control over key resources in Francophone Africa. They've taken back control of their natural wealth, nationalizing resources to benefit their own people rather than foreign corporations. Take a moment to picture this. Burkina Faso, a country that has long been exploited for its resources, finally taking control of its most valuable asset, ensuring that its people benefit from this lucrative resource. And Burkina Faso isn't alone. Mali is making similar moves. The country recently inked a deal with Russia to build its own gold refinery.
1953, 1954, 1957, and 1958.
Even the leaflets dropped from the sky were meant to impress the electorate with the godlike qualities of the candidate. How effective would it be? The voting would tell the story. Party leaders crisscrossed the country holding rallies everywhere. Campaign tours covered tens of thousands of miles and many more words. Over African dirt and tarmac roads, through rainforest and upland savanna country, hitting every bush town and village on the way. When we spoke with the Sardana, this became evident.
I'd like to ask you to make a prediction, sir. Who will be the next federal prime minister? My party. Without particular man? Yes?
The Sardana's hand-picked candidate for prime minister is Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, a modest, soft-spoken former schoolmaster, one of Nigeria's most skillful statesmen.
I'm glad to see that in the last few years, the Americans are taking quite a lot of interest in Nigeria. And I hope that interest will continue.
Next, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, leader of the Action Group, a major party of the Yoruba people in the western region, popularly known as AWO.
And it will vote solidly for the Action Group on the 12th and put that party in power, you will certainly get that wage.
AWO is hailed by his followers for his daring helicopter campaign.
The Northern People's Congress considers the North as its preserve, and and the leaders have done everything in their part to keep the so-called Southern parties out of the Northern region. But the Action Group decided to organize in the North, and we now have branches in every village and hamlet in the Northern region.
The third major candidate is Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, head of the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroon, along with his title for a political party. He is a veteran nationalist and a hater of colonialism. The flamboyant, American-educated journalist, sportsman, politician, has a devoted following among the Igbo people of the eastern region, and his popularity is spreading.
My good friend, the Prime Minister of the Federation, Alhaji Abubakar
Tamama Balewa. It is broadcast the other night, committed what I thought was a faux pas, which the Prime Minister should not commit.
The flag goes up for Z. It has the right. He regards his administration as a permanent or a caretaker administration. My main concern is to restore law and order as soon as possible.
You talked about the two races you've been running. The first, the war, which you've now won. Secondly, the race to secure the confidence of the Igbos again, to reintegrate them into Nigerian society. Now, how are you going to be able to do that?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, right from the beginning of these operations, we've never taken the Igbos as enemies, as Ojukwu has made them to believe, and has made the world to believe. As far as I'm concerned, the Igbos will be treated as an equal citizen in this country. There will be no second-rate citizens in Nigeria unless by their own behavior and performance. And this applies to any Nigerian whatsoever. The head and the heart is the only yardstick which can judge who will be a second-rate citizen. Therefore, the Igbos...
Major General Philip Effiong, officer administering the government of the Republic of Biafra, now wish to make the following declaration. That we affirm we are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept the authority of the Federal Military Government of Nigeria. That we accept the existing administrative and political structure of the Federation of Nigeria. That any future constitutional arrangement will be worked out by representatives of the people of Nigeria. That the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist.
It is not a question of hatred against the Igbos. No, it is just the principle of keeping Nigeria one. That was what I saw too. And that is what even my colleague, my old colleague, Odumego Ojukwu in Famen saw too. And that is the reason why, at the end of the war, in order to make sure that there is no hard feeling, we use the expression, no victor, no vanquish.
There was a bloodless coup today in Nigeria, which is
indirectly bills such matters shall be debated in the said council and committed to my secrecy. So help me God.
Fellow Nigerians, events of the past few years have indicated that despite our great human and material resources, the government has not been able to fulfill the legitimate expectations of our people. Nigeria has been left to drift. This situation, if not arrested, would inevitably have resulted in chaos and even bloodshed.
I'm having honor to maintain, and I believe I have no reason at this stage to lie. So all that you have had
the supreme sacrifice for their crime against the nation. Clergymen offer the condemned man the last sacrament, while a Muslim leader also prays for it. This time, the firing squad took position and the bullets fired out from the barrels of their target. And for the condemned men, that was the end of the story. The Supreme Military Council has been meeting to consider, among other things, the conclusions of the military tribunal appointed by the federal military government to try those involved in the attempted coup of 13th February. The council has confirmed the sentences passed by the tribunal. Those condemned to death by firing squad have been executed today. These include Lieutenant Colonel B.S. Dimka, and Mr. J.D. Gombo, two of the principal actors of the Abashi coup.
When President Shagari swept back to power, the warning signs were loud and clear. Nigeria's economy in a terrible mess. Widespread corruption at the highest government levels. Shagari tried to
work permit. They are given these for weeks in order to regularize their position.
The conduct of the 1983 elections left that hope, since as I said before on another occasion, that election could be anything but free and fair. The Nigerian people were therefore limbered with a government whose suspect massive victory at the polls lulled it into a state of complacency. The planless, downright incompetence and irresponsibility which characterized the previous 4 years continued.
Begin by drawing public attention to little but important everyday manifestations of indiscipline, such as rushing into buses, driving the wrong side of the road, littering the streets, parks, and dwelling compounds. Up to this moment, there has been no formal declaration of war against indiscipline. It is my pleasure, therefore, to declare today the launching day for the war against indiscipline.
It would be urged General Babangida to continue in office. The general ignored the association, so to speak, and went ahead with plans to hold the presidential election.
A lot of excuses have been advanced for lack of realistic training in the units and formations. I'm well aware of the difficult conditions under which your training is being conducted. I agree that you have not enough training areas of frequent maneuvers.
Chief of the Armed Forces, Chief Ernest Shoneka, and my subsequent appointment as Head of State and Commander-in-Chief, I have had extensive consultations within the Armed Forces hierarchy and other well-meaning Nigerians in a bid to find solutions to the various political, economic, and social problems. The following decisions come into immediate effect. The interim national government is hereby dissolved.
This is a story about uncovering Nigeria's hidden conflicts.
Nigerian armed forces are doing wonderfully well. I think by all indices, we might even beat the deadline. But one most important thing is that information sharing is very important. Civilians need to give us information to address certain security challenges.
We are ready. We have a lot of equipment that are getting, and Mr. President just approved some funds also for us to get more equipment.
This continent observes lively needed traits and capacity in the armed forces for positive change in our security situation.
Implemented by its civilian rulers have been successful. Aware that former President Daniel Moi was on the verge of losing his seat in the 1982 failed coup. However, very less is said of an initial attempt in 1971 against President Jomo Kenyatta's regime that also failed. Obote in neighboring Uganda. Obote's act of the 1971 coup plot was Major General Joseph Dollo, who was the then Chief of General Staff. As per the plan, Dollo was to be, which had resulted in the discrimination of Mr. Odinga's tribemates in government government and security circles in the coup plot? The answer can be found in a telex message sent on the 23rd of June, 1971 by Sir Eric Norris, the then British High Commissioner, in which he quotes Vice President Daniel Arap Moi saying that Jomo had decided not to prosecute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. President of Namibia, the Deputy Secretary General, my dear sister, President of the General Assembly, President Yang, brothers and sisters. We are here. You might well have said that the battle was impossible. But we know enough to know, as President Mandela told us, it is not impossible if it can be done, or it is impossible until it is done. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has taught us that national solutions to global problems do not work. We come to Glasgow with global ambition to save our people and to save our planet. But we now find three gaps: on mitigation, climate pledges or NDCs. Without more, we will leave the world on a pathway to 2.7 degrees, and with more, we are still likely to get to 2 degrees. These commitments, made by some, are based on technologies yet to be developed, and this is at best reckless and at worst dangerous. On finance, we are $20 billion short of the $100 billion, and this commitment, even then, might only be met in 2023. On adaptation, finance remains only at 25%, not the 50-50 split that was promised nor needed given the warming that is already taking place on this earth. Climate finance to frontline small island developing states declined by 25% in 2019. Failure to provide the critical finance and that of loss and damage is measured, my friends, in lives and livelihoods in our communities. This is immoral and it is unjust. If Glasgow is to deliver on the promises of Paris, it must close these three gaps. So I ask to you, what must we say to our people living on the front line in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific, when both ambition and regrettably some of the needed faces at Glasgow are not present? What excuse should we give for the failure? In the words of that Caribbean icon Eddie Grant, will they mourn us on the front line? When will we, as world leaders across the world, address the pressing issues that are truly causing our people angst and worry, whether it is climate or whether it is vaccines? Simply put, when will leaders lead? Our people are watching, and our people are taking note. And are we really going to leave Scotland without the resolve and the ambition that is sorely needed to save lives and to save our planet? How many more voices and how many more pictures of people must we see on these screens without being able to move? Or are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity? I have been saying to Barbadians for many years that many hands make light work. Today, we need the correct mix of voices, ambition, and action. Do some leaders in this world believe that they can survive and thrive on their own? Have they not learned from the pandemic? Can there be peace and prosperity if 1/3 of the world literally prospers and the other 2/3 of the world live under siege and face calamitous threats?
During the 8-day visit of Haile Selassie to the United States, he will participate in many ceremonies that demonstrate the respect of a friendly nation.
gentlemen, I know I speak in behalf of all of my fellow Americans in welcoming His Imperial Majesty back to the United States. Since His Majesty visited the United States nearly a decade ago, we have seen one of the most extraordinary revolutions in history. And that has been the appearance on the world scene of 29 independent countries in the short space of less than 10 years, including over 150 million people.
Continent, echoing the dreams of past Pan-African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. The alliance is not exclusive. It is a call to all Africans who hope for sovereignty, independence, and total freedom. Captain Ibrahim Traoré said,
"Don't say, what are we going to ask from you? That's a big brother mentality. What are you going to ask from us?" NATO is not a very peaceful organization. You can't talk peace and NATO in one sentence. It's not true what you are saying. Because what peace did NATO take to Libya? Look at what you did to Libya to date. Because you are going after one man, you destroy the whole country. We're not asking for anything. We're fine. So let's relate as equals, not as a beggar and the big brother supplier. No, we will relate with the European Union. It's a necessary body. We'll relate with it, we'll respect it, and the respect must be mutual, and will engage on what is in the interest of our countries, not what is in the interest of the European Union.
In the March on Washington in 1963, the cry was jobs and justice. In the 20-year anniversary of the March on Washington, the cry was jobs and justice. We are now in 2010. And what is the cry? Jobs and justice. Well, wait a minute. How long are you going to sit around begging white people to do for us what we have the power to do for ourselves?
rather than prioritizing the needs of its member states. Despite decades of existence, ECOWAS has failed to address the deep economic disparities within its member states. Dependency on foreign aid and unfair trade agreements have stunted local...
Taking into account a certain number of aspects, surface area certainly, but above all, strategic and economic. This will be proposed in 2025. Decentralization is today a very good thing in substance, but in implementation, it is suffering. A study has currently been carried out at the level of ANSAL be able to re-articulate and give new missions to the authorities of the local authorities. In the field of urbanization, during the year 2025, after a study carried out in 2024, the Burkinabe population will be offered choices to redesign our city. Take into account all the friends of Burkina Faso who wish to visit Burkina Faso, participate in the development of Burkina Faso. It is in this sense that we will be an example of sovereignty, an example of dignity, and a pride throughout Africa and throughout the entire world. The Institute of Black Peoples will have to be a springboard to attract to Burkina Faso all the blacks from all over the world who will come to recharge their batteries, review cultures, and be able to learn from our cultures, modernize them to develop our homeland. A building will be erected at the museum level to take into account certain aspects of our culture so that the Institute can be based on these values and teach the entire world what the black people are, what Africa is. I wish that 2025 will be a year of perfect health.
You got the love, but you got no money. The love shall crumble down. You got the power, you got the strength. Got no money, you crumble down. You got the talent, you got no money. Your talent will crumble down. They say the good thing come to those keep on trying. Now they want to see no way. Like the fruit never drop from heaven. Let the money grow up on the tree. I love the one that show me how to fish. That will give me some fishes. When the fishes are all gone, I know where to fish. Common sense of living. Common sense of living.